Well, this is interesting because your question brings up a halacha in the Mishnah that is not spoken about. There are two halachas in the Mishnah that are relevant here. And there's a lot of speaking about one of the halachas, and there's very little speaking about the other halacha. The first halacha, this is in the fourth parak of Gittin, maybe you actually learned it, Ein paidin es hashvoyen yeser michtei demeim. That means we do not pay a ransom for hostages more than their economic value as a slave. We don't pay what is called excessive concessions for hostages. And the Gemara gives two reasons, but the reason that's upkapasan lahalacha is because you're encouraging the enemy to take more and more people if they can get $1 million for a hostage. That's the first halacha. Don't pay what is called excessive ransom. There's another halacha that people are not talking about so much that actually says we don't try to rescue hostages by rescue missions because we would be endangering the people that remain behind. So if you think about this, all aspects of this raise potentially halachic problems. We have hostages. On one hand, there's a tremendous mitzvah called pidyon shvuyin, redeeming captives. You even sell a sefer Torah for pidyon shvuyin. And then generally, pikuach nefesh, your mechalel Shabbos, to save a life. So you would think, b'pashtus, we do whatever we can to rescue the shvuyin. But the problem is, the Gemara says, if you give in to those demands, you're going to be endangering future people, because if Hamas knows that for every hostage they can get 100 prisoners, they'll take more and more and more and more. So you think you're saving 100 lives now, but maybe you're saving 100 lives now by being masakein 1,000 people in the future. And when it's not just money, but you're actually releasing terrorists, you have another inyan that it's not only you're encouraging future hostage takings, but you're mamish introducing people that are reitzchim, they're back into the population. So, ali b'di'emes, there's a very, very serious question. Now, again, emotionally, this is extremely difficult. If you were a prime minister, how do you look a parent in the eye and say, I'm sorry, we have an enemy, we have to get rid of Hamas. Hamas is going to endanger our population. If that means we have to bomb them and not give in to get the hostages, so be it. That's extremely difficult. But halachically, there is at least a shaila. Are we allowed to give in to prisoner exchange programs? Isn't that excessive ransoms that are encouraging hostage taking and being masake in the future population? Now, even what was done, Baruch Hashem, this past week, just was yesterday or 2 days ago, in which there was a daring rescue mission that Baruch Hashem was zeichet to get 2 people. So this was a military mission, but the mission itself says even that may be a problem because you're endangering the people that remain. The tighter security, they might decide to kill, et cetera, et cetera. So Lamaisa, what the mission is basically saying is, in terms of strategy, that you can't just look at the immediate situation. I have people b'sakana, I got to rescue them. You have to look at the long-term taitzos, the long-term consequences of the short-term decision. So Lamaisa, these are very, very serious halachic questions, and they're actually serious military questions. They're serious ethical questions generally. Now, interestingly enough, this is not the first time the Paiskim in Eretz Yisrael had to deal with this. This is an issue that's been going on for many, many years. As you might expect, there's a big machlekes haPaiskim. Ravaji Yosef, well, let's go back to the most famous one. Gilad Shalit is probably the most famous hostage exchange in which he was in captivity for many years, five years, more than 5 years, and they finally released him in exchange for 1,000 terrorists, among whom was Sinwar, who was the mastermind of October 7th. So it's amazing. You save Gilad Shalit, and then you release the guy that's going to, mastermind the murder of 1,200 civilians, plus all of the hostages, etc. I mean, that itself is an example of how dangerous this was. Ravaji Yosef basically did matter it. And his understanding, it's hard to go into all the background, I have recorded shiurim on this, was ein safek v'isi midei vadai, meaning to say you got to look at the vadai and ignore the suffix. Right now we have people b'sakana. We got to rescue them. What's going to happen in the future? That's not for us to look at. The Mishnah seems to say you look at it. So he says the Mishnah, it's a big deichik, is only talking about a case where actual lives are not in danger. The shvuyin are being held for money and not for sakanas nefashos. Okay. So Rav Ovadia matched it. We know Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, not with Gilad Shalit, but in an earlier case, actually said it's usher. He says in time of milchama, Rav Yaakov said, there is no way that you can give any type of chizuk to the enemy. And Rav Yaakov said, this is an interesting way of looking at it, the same way that soldiers must fight the enemy, even though that endangers their lives, because the ultimate goal is to destroy this enemy, so too, chas v'shalom, the chatufim are involuntarily participating in this war. They didn't choose it. And you can't allow anything to be done that will compromise the military objective, even if it puts them in danger, because they become chayolim, who are obligated to risk their lives for the purpose of the greater military objective. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky actually held it was usher to make any type of deal with terrorists. Now, it may be, according to that svara, even the rescue attempts might be usher for the same reason. He didn't clearly say that. But he did say you don't make terrorist deals, because we look at chatufim as chayolim, involuntary chayolim, who must, in a sense, give their lives for the military effort. According to that, people talk about the permissibility of Israeli bombing with civilian casualties. According to Rav Yaakov, not only are we permitted to bomb if we're going to get civilian Arab casualties, but God forbid, even if it would mean we would kill the Jews in captivity, he held that was part of our obligation. I'm not here to paskin. This is a very, very painful question, and one cannot simply be insensitive to the feelings of families. But I'll just mention, all of you remember Jonathan Pollard, who was in prison for 30 years, and now he lives in Eretz Yisrael. He's not a posek, so obviously what he says is not psak halacha in any way, but he is very open. He says that it is absolutely wrong to have any publicity about hostages, and he actually said families should be ordered not to talk about it, and if they insist on demanding release, they should be thrown in jail. Now, this is what he said. That's a very extreme position, but he says it is a state of national emergency, and Israel cannot allow itself to be swayed away from this military objective, because if they don't get rid of this enemy will come back with greater force and destroy more and more people. So what looks like Rahmanas in the short term turns out to be tremendous achsarias in the long term. Again, I want to emphasize, because I don't want to get into arguments through email or whatever it is, I'm just articulating a position, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky's position. Remember, Rav Ovadia took the opposite position. Rav Ovadia Yosef, and he says Rav Elyashiv agreed with him, although we don't have a tshuva from him. Rav Ovadia Yosef, and he says Rav Elyashiv took the position that the pikuach nefesh of hostages overrides the military objective. So you see, it's a very, very complicated issue in which Gedolei HaPoskim Mamish were in great disagreement. So my answer is you have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi as to what your own position should be. It's very, very difficult, and it's really tearing apart Israel right now. This is one of the most emotionally difficult issues. Hamas is proposing, all of these hostage releases if you just have a ceasefire for, 6 months or whatever it is. Well, okay, that's great to have hostages back, Baruch Hashem. But giving Hamas 6 months, do you realize what that is? That essentially undoes everything that was hopefully accomplished since October 7th, right? So you got to be very careful. You can't allow emotion to override the logic of what needs to be done in this tragic situation. So this is one of many reasons that I'm happy I'm not in the political system, that I don't have to make those decisions. They are halachically complicated. They are emotionally difficult. They are politically explosive. Very, very, very hard decisions.